Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name is Adam, this is Vancity Audi, and this is part 2 of my fuel comparison video. We had my B8 S4 on the dyno, finding out what is the best pump gas that we have available to us in British Columbia, Canada. So far, I have tested E17 blended with Chevron 94 as my baseline and the fuel that I run all the time. We dropped it down to Petro Canada Ultra 94, then we switched it over to Chevron 92 from Washington State, and we ended off with Chevron 94. We saw horsepower, torque, and timing loss every single fuel we used. Today's video is going to showcase Shell 91, Esso 91, and then we're going to take it back up to the fuel that I run all the time, Chevron 94 blended with E17, to see if we can gain back all the power, torque, and timing that we've lost. This video and its results are mind-blowing. Enjoy, guys. Now that we've seen the performance and those numbers out of Chevron 94 with no ethanol blended in, it is time to finally see if Shell 91 is better or worse than Chevron 94. Here we have the Shell 91, which is sold as a 0% ethanol fuel. And just like the Chevron 94, we find 0 ethanol in this fuel. It is pure gasoline found in Shell 91. So the strangest turn of events here at Racing Greed. Sean, the dyno operator, and I are guys that we want to make sure we're putting out as accurate information as we can. And something extremely unexpected happened. Check out these results off of the Shell fuel. What in the hell? 241 and 264. That's a 40 horsepower drop. So we think that that might have been a bad batch. Like, look at the power drop all the way through the entire rev range. The intake air temps were roughly the same within 1 degree of the last pull, so we actually sent a buddy out to grab new fuel. So our buddy Jamie went out to grab the same 91 Shell fuel from a different gas station. He's using the exact same method I was, where he pumps out 20 liters into his fuel tank before he hits the jerry can. We're gonna get it in, we're gonna pump the fuel out of the car, put in a new batch, let it run, and do 3 more pulls and see if it's perhaps a bad batch of gas or if Shell 91 is just that much worse. I can't believe it. It can't be that much worse on performance, but that's why we're doing these tests, to see if it's true or not. This is the log using Shell 91, and this is where it all starts going horribly wrong. We start out with an intake air temp of 32.25 degrees Celsius. It hits a maximum temperature of 38.25 by the end of the run, so still very, very cool. Now, the biggest issue with this pull is not what you were about to see, but what we actually heard on the dyno, and that was audible pinging. We were scared for the health of the vehicle. It was making some horrible racket. As for the log, we start seeing quite a bit of reduction in timing at 2,000 RPM. 5 cylinders seeing a minimum of 2 degrees being pulled, and then it just gets uglier until we hit 5,100 RPM, where we see a massive 8.5 degrees of correction out of cylinder 6, with a minimum of 3.25 out of cylinder 4, but all 6 cylinders are struggling. It gets a bit better, but then it dives back down at about 6,300 RPM, where we see 8.25 out of cylinder 6 and a minimum of 2.5 degrees being pulled from 2 of the cylinders, but all 6 cylinders are still seeing ignition correction. Up until
red line, where the least amount of correction we're seeing is 0.75 out of cylinder 4, but we are still seeing 6.5 degrees being pulled out of cylinder 6.
All right, so our buddy Jamie went and got us the fuel. He followed the procedure of 20 liters into the tank before he put it into the jerry can. We just loaded up the car, and I just reviewed the logs. The logs showed everything was fine. The boost was there, the fuel trims were good. It appears as if the car is running as it should. I don't know, was that a bad batch of gas? Are they not putting 91 in that pump and it's actually 87 and the gas station's fault? We are about to find out with this second tank of 91 Shell fuel. Okay guys, we gave our best effort here to make sure that Shell, I don't know, what are we gonna say? We gave Shell the best chance of success we could possibly give them. They failed epically. Look at this stuff, guys. This is from the second fill up. 246 compared to 241. The torque's almost the same. We only gained 5 frigging horsepower. Shell 91 not living up to the hype. Those are the power graphs between both the first set of Shell runs and the second set of Shell runs. Look how much lower that is than the previous runs. Now we're going to show you a graph of the Chevron 94 compared to what we just did with Shell. Here are the graphs and the numbers comparing the second batch of Shell fuel with Chevron 94. You can't make this stuff up, guys. Same dyno, same day, same car, just different fuels. Look at those graphs. Throughout the entire pull, power is being lost using Shell 91. You're not even close, guys. It's like 35 horsepower. That is unfrigging real. I can't even believe this. I knew it was worse, but I didn't know this much worse. Holy hell.
Shell 91 take 2. It starts out at 33 degrees intake air temp, and it climbs up to 39.75 degrees for the intake air temp. Nothing too crazy, in line with all of the rest of these logs. Now for the ignition correction, and it is just as horrible as the first batch of Shell 91. Starting at 2100 RPM, we are seeing ignition correction out of not all, 5 of the 6 cylinders. And it just gets worse and worse and worse until we creep up to 5300 RPM. We are seeing 8 degrees out of cylinder 2. The last log with the first batch of Shell 91 was 8.5 degrees, so a little bit better, but still horrendous. The least amount of timing being -3 out of cylinder 4. Gets a little better through the rest of the pull, all the way up until redline, where you're still seeing correction out of every single cylinder, with a maximum of 4.75 out of cylinder 1 and a minimum of 0.75 out of cylinder 4.
Here is the last batch we're going to be testing today. This is the Esso 91. If my memory serves me correctly, this is also an ethanol-free fuel, but I'm not 100% sure. If it isn't, it would have up to 10% ethanol content, but we're gonna see if this is worse than Shell. So far, we've been super surprised at those results. And here we have the final ethanol test of the day with Esso 91. I wasn't sure that it was sold as 0% ethanol, but now I have proven it. 0% ethanol as well in the Esso 91. Here we have the comparison of Esso versus Shell. Almost identical, both claiming 91 octane, and I'm fairly certain 0 ethanol percentage. Those are the graphs, almost identical, side by side. Look at that though. The closest fuels that we tested today though was the Esso 91 and the Shell 91.
Here's the log for Esso 91. It starts out at 34.5 degrees for an intake air temp and creeps all the way up to 39.75 degrees by the end of the pull. As you guys could tell by the amount of power it made, the ignition correction does look similar, but it actually looks a bit better than Shell. The correction starts at 2200 RPM. We only see it at a one cylinder at 0.75. And then as you get worse and worse and worse and higher in the RPMs, we hit 5100 RPM where we are seeing 7.75 degrees at a cylinder 2 with a minimum of 1.75 degrees being pulled at a cylinder 3. So slightly less corrections than we saw on Shell, but still horribly bad. You get higher in the rev range all the way up close to redline on this Esso 91 and you are seeing, what is that, minus 6.25 out of cylinder 6 as the maximum amount of ignition correction and the least amount of 1.25 out of cylinder 4.
So we have our numbers from, oh my goodness, I don't know, 6 different fuels now. And we've shown you guys what it ran with as a baseline that I use, the 94 Chevron blended with about E15 to E20. Today was an E17 blend. Started all the way down up here and we've dropped all the way down here. What we have now done is gotten all of that garbage crap local fuel out of the tank. We've put back Chevron 94 mixed with ethanol. I have an E17 blend on the gauge again. We're gonna do a few more pulls and see if the car slowly adapts back up to the high level of fuel that we're using and if we're able to make the same amount of power as we did when we first got here. Here's the final run of the day and the final comparison of the day for you guys. 294 and 283 was from our very first set of runs. After my car had been running on this setup for a long time and had full adaptation to the fuel, this number, 288 and 280, was after we did 3 back-to-back runs. The air intake temp was higher than normal, and it didn't quite have as much time to adapt, but we almost got it back up to what it was supposed to, as you can see on those curves. From the first run to the second run to the third run, it kept learning. The timing kept shrinking, or not the timing shrinking, the timing retardation kept shrinking. The timing advance kept going up, but we almost made it back up to what we ran at the beginning of the day.
The final log of the day, back using Chevron 94 blended with 17% ethanol. We start out with an intake air temp of 38.25 degrees. Sadly, there was another customer waiting for the dyno, so we really had to blast through these 3 runs. So we weren't able to get the car as cool as we would have liked to. 43.5 degrees was the peak intake air temp, which is higher than all of the other runs that we did. Here are the ignition corrections for all 6 cylinders, and as you can see, there was still plenty because the car was still adapting to the high octane fuel that we had just put in the tank. At 2500 RPM, we are seeing correction in all 6 cylinders. Not nearly as much, but we are still seeing correction. There definitely needs to be some time driving the car to get it to trust what's in the tank. As you guys saw when I first brought the car there and we did those dyno pulls, I was seeing much less correction because the ECU had adapted to the fuel. At 6300 RPM, we are seeing 5.5 degrees out of cylinder 6 and a minimum of 0.75 out of cylinder 4. We get up closer to redline and it gets a little bit worse. At 6800, right at redline, we are seeing 6 degrees out of cylinder 6 and 1.5 as a minimum of cylinder 4. I just really wanted to show you guys this log as well, that it takes time for these cars to adapt to really high quality fuel. It can't just all of a sudden start making crazy high horsepower as you expected it to once it has had months learning of the same fuel, which is what I use on a daily, E15 to E20 blended with Chevron 94.
Here we go, guys. This is the final list of competitors for this fuel showdown. Chevron 94 and E17 starting at 294 and 283. The Petro Ultra 94 dropping down to 288 and 282. Chevron 92 US dropping down to 285 and 278. Chevron 94 down to 281 and 273. Shell 91, the most surprising of the day by far, dropping close to 40 horsepower and like another 10 foot-pounds of torque. Esso 91, virtually the same amount. And then the final pull as the car was learning again, back up to 288 and 280. And a comparison from the absolute best fuel to the worst of 49 wheel horsepower and 18 foot-pounds of torque. For those of you in British Columbia that say fuel doesn't matter, you're absolutely insane. Well guys, 49 wheel horsepower and 18 foot-pounds of torque. From the highest quality fuel to the lowest quality fuel that we tested today. That is incredible. Now to be completely real with you guys, when I was editing and we were looking back at the, God, I don't even know, like 10 logs, 11 logs from all of the runs we did with Chevron 94 and Shell 91, I was like, can it be true? Can it be 35 to 40 wheel horsepower better fuel? I've never heard of that before from anyone. So I reached back out to Sean from Racing Greed and I was like, ugh, did we screw up somehow? Like, was there too much of the previous fuel left in the Chevron and maybe that made it overperform? Ugh. So I started to have some doubts. I gotta be real with you guys. I had a little bit of anxiety because I pride myself on putting out content for you guys that is accurate, or as close to accurate as I can possibly do for you. So what did we do? We went above and beyond. Stay tuned to part 3 of this fuel comparison. I grabbed 2 more Chevron 94 fuel samples from 2 other gas stations. I then went and picked up 2 more Shell 91 samples from 2 other Shell stations. I went back to Racing Greed. And in part 3, you're gonna see a head-to-head comparison where I show up to the dyno already using Chevron 94. No more blending of ethanol. I get multiple runs on Chevron 94, the first batch, Chevron 94, the second batch. Then we completely drain the tank just like we did in this part and the part earlier, and I fill it up with Shell 91, and we do it all over again. Were we right the first time? Were we wrong? We screwed it up, and the results were totally different the second time? Stay tuned in a few days' time for part 3 of this video to put it to rest and crown the champion. Is it Chevron 94 or is it Shell 91? And I royally buggered the first attempt at testing the fuels. Stay tuned, guys. Until then, take care.